Welcome to our Dancing in Bridgerton miniseries, where we look at the historical dancing conventions of Regency-era England and how it would have affected our favorite characters in the hit series Bridgerton. If you're new to the channel, hello! We're glad you found us. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like us and subscribe for more content. Now, just to be clear, this video is not going to bash Bridgerton. I enjoy the show, and I actually respect their honesty about the fact that they don't feel beholden to historical accuracy to tell their stories. Besides, I don't expect the dancing in the period dramas I watch to be historically accurate. The only reason I talk about what dancing in the Regency was actually like is because as a Regency dance caller and teacher, I get asked about it constantly. Not only will I not be nitpicking Bridgerton's dance scenes in this series, but if you really want to be shocked, I'm actually planning on making a video about the things I liked about the dancing in each of the seasons. At the time of recording, only season 1 has come out, but I intend to make videos for each season as it premieres. So today, for part 2 of our Dancing in Bridgerton series, we will be asking the question, where would the Bridgertons have danced? Oh right, and here's a spoiler warning for some major plot points from season 1. Number 1, at royal balls. To start off, I want to specify that I'm talking about royal balls and not court balls, the difference being that royal balls are private events hosted by royals, whereas court balls were state occasions such as the king or queen's birthday that were considered a public event. Although there had been court balls for the king and queen's birthdays earlier in the reign of George III, the custom was discontinued after 1802 due to the king's ill health, and was not reinstated until 1825, as evidenced by the lack of mention of the birthday balls in contemporary accounts after 1802, and then confirmed by several newspaper articles from 1825 when the balls were revived, like this one that I found in the British newspaper archive from the London Gazette dated 5th of July, 1825. Yesterday, the first grand entertainment was given by His Majesty at the Palace of St. James's since the improvements and alterations which that ancient building has undergone, and which is the first thing of the kind which has taken place in that palace for 23 years, when the late king and queen had their last ball there at the celebration of the late king's birth, when minuets were in fashion, and when public balls were given by both their majesties at the celebration of their birthdays after the drawing rooms, at which all those who were in the habit of attending courts were admitted. These assemblies were discontinued owing to the declining years of their late majesties and other circumstances. No public or state use has been made of this venerable pile for a number of years. So alas, there were no court balls in the Regency, and indeed we see none in Bridgerton, though we do see what is presumably the drawing room that the article talks about, which is when Daphne and the other debutantes get presented to the Queen. However, even though there were no court balls in the Regency, the royal family still hosted balls of their own, and the ones given by the Prince Regent at his residence at Carlton House were known for their opulence and fashionability, qualities that were reflected in the dancing, which was credited in helping to popularize the decade's two big dance fads, the waltz and the quadrille. These royal galas are definitely the kind of soirees that the Bridgertons and their social circle would have attended, and in fact, for a family of their rank, it would have been considered humiliating not to be invited. Number 2, at Almacks and other public assemblies. Any member of the nobility or gentry could potentially be presented at court, but only the most fashionable and accomplished members of society would receive the far more exclusive voucher to dance at Almack's assembly rooms with the cream of London society. In the Regency era, a subscription to Almacks for the season was the highest sign of fashion and marriageability, even more than presentation at court. Everyone wanted to get their daughter a ticket to Almacks, and all the young men knew that Almacks was the best place to find a wife of the highest social station. Even though the balls hosted at Almacks were technically assembly balls, they did not function like other assembly rooms. In theory, assembly rooms were supposed to work like this. You signed up and paid for an annual subscription, in return for which you were entitled to attend a series of balls throughout the season. In order to receive a subscription, you not only had to pay a subscription fee, but you also had to either be a local resident or a visitor to the neighborhood who could be vouched for by a resident. The concept of a subscription fee had the effect of excluding the poor, though it was affordable enough to be purchased by some of the lower rungs of the middle class, such as tradesmen and their families. And even though Assemblies made the pretext of only allowing respectable people to attend, in practice, if you could afford the subscription, you weren't likely to be turned away unless you caused a scandal. Hence, ordinary assembly balls were not seen as exclusive events. But that's not how Almacks worked. To start with, the subscription fee was many times more than an ordinary assembly room, but that was assuming you could even get a voucher in the first place. At Almacks, a group of great ladies served as the patronesses, and they rigorously vetted everyone who applied for a subscription. Wealth and rank alone were not enough to get a person into Almacks. The lady patronesses hated new money in every form of social climbing, and even a title didn't guarantee admittance. They cared much more about popularity and an air of good breeding and behavior. And just to make things even more exclusive, everyone had to reapply for membership to Almacks at the beginning of each London season, and past membership was no guarantee of being accepted again. All this combined to make Almacks the top signifier of social status and the marriage mart par excellence. Interestingly enough, however, as exclusive as Almacks was, it definitely wasn't a tiny club, with reports of some balls in the Regency era indicating that several hundred people were in attendance, and there were regular reports of dancers being extremely crowded on the dance floor. Despite this, dancing at Almacks was the height of fashion, and whatever was danced at Almacks would be imitated throughout London and the rest of Britain. In fact, Almacks is also credited with making the waltz respectable and further popularizing the quadrille, dances that would continue to be popular in the ballroom throughout the 19th century. I've seen many examples of sheet music from the Regency that advertised as danced at Almacks as a proof of quality. In Bridgerton, Daphne's triumphant presentation and being declared flawless by the Queen would be the kind of social clout that would all but guarantee her a voucher for Almacks. That is, if being from a fashionable and respectable old aristocratic family weren't already enough to get her in. Simon, the Duke of Hastings, would also have been considered a desirable person to have at Almacks, both because he is an eligible bachelor and also a duke, and the fact that he was whispered to be a rake wouldn't necessarily have been deterrent despite the veneer of respectability at the establishment. I mean, if they let someone as scandalous as Lord Byron in, clearly they didn't care about morality as much as they did about fashion. Though I should probably mention that one of Byron's lovers, Lady Caroline Lamb, the one who allegedly called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know, did have her voucher revoked, not so much because she had an affair with Byron, but rather because she held a grudge against him and would make a scene whenever Byron showed his face. However, she was able to get her voucher reinstated because her sister-in-law was one of the patronesses. So, nepotism wins again. Returning to Bridgerton, though, I don't think Simon would have applied for a voucher to Almacks for two reasons. First, because he doesn't want to get married, and second, because he's a private person who's not really interested in being seen in fashionable circles. Daphne's brother Antony also probably wouldn't apply for a voucher for his own sake, since he doesn't want to marry either, but he might have applied purely as a chaperone for his sister. Whether or not he would have been accepted is another matter entirely, because the patronesses were fond of causing trouble by including one family member but not another. In the first Bridgerton novel, Antony remarks to Simon that he was willing to chaperone Daphne at Almacks all season if that's what it took to get her a husband. What a good brother. In contrast to how desirable the Bridgertons and the Duke would have been to the patronesses at Almacks, the Featheringtons were exactly the kind of tacky social climbers that would have been scorned despite their title. And even if they had managed to get a membership, the scandals in the family like Marina's pregnancy and Lord Featherington's ruining the family with his gambling and suicide would have gotten their membership revoked. Remember the scene where the Featheringtons were refused admittance to a royal party? Well, being kicked out of Almacks would have been an even bigger marker of disgrace. It was the ultimate mark of shame in London society. In fact, it was better never to get into Almacks at all than to lose your voucher. I found another little reference to Almacks in the first Bridgerton book, namely that Lady Bridgerton was supposed to be friends with Lady Jersey, one of the patronesses of Almacks. Another point that indicates that Daphne would have been able to get a subscription if she wanted. We get another reference to the lady patronesses of Almacks from the Bridgerton TV series in the form of Lady Cowper, who I assume is a reference to Emily, Countess Cooper, one of the lady patronesses, and leaders of London society. The surname is spelled Cowper, but pronounced Cooper, just like the famous Georgian poet William Cooper, who is mentioned in Jane Austen's novels as a favorite author of both Marianne Dashwood and Fanny Price. I don't know if the show's Lady Cowper is supposed to be the same character because the historical Lady Cooper didn't have any grown-up children in 1813. And she doesn't seem to be a countess because her daughter is styled Miss Cowper instead of Lady Cressida. Courtesy titles in the English nobility are complicated, but just to quickly explain, a countess is the wife of an earl, and the daughters of any peer of the rank of earl or above are styled lady plus their Christian name. But the daughters of a peer below the rank of an earl are just misses, although they do get to be the honorable miss plus their surname. That's why Daphne is still Miss Bridgerton even though her father was a lord. His rank wasn't high enough as a viscount. And just to make it even more confusing, the system of courtesy titles is different for sons as compared to daughters. Boys only got to be lord plus their Christian name if their father was above the rank of an earl, which leads to the awkwardness of earls' children being styled Mr. plus surname if they're boys, but lady plus Christian name if they're girls. Anyway, there's been a lot written about Almacks, so if you're interested in learning more, I'll leave some links in the description. Of course, Almacks was far from the only assembly rooms where one could dance in London, and we certainly have evidence of the aristocracy dancing at other assembly rooms from time to time. In those cases, however, the venue itself wasn't nearly as relevant as the rank of the persons in attendance. Number 3, Vauxhall Gardens. I want to mention Vauxhall because we actually see dancing at Vauxhall in the first episode of season 1, where Daphne and Simon decide to begin their public ruse of a courtship at an evening entertainment held at Vauxhall Gardens, which was a pleasure garden at the time that was just outside of London, though today it's within the city limits. Pleasure gardens were a sort of proto-amusement park, if that makes sense, and could get just as crowded as our modern amusement parks in the summer months. They were popular mostly for evening entertainments consisting of concerts, dining, dancing, fireworks, waterworks, and elaborate stage performances, all in a fairy tale setting of lush greenery, exotic-looking buildings, and tens of thousands of colored lamps, a feat which was particularly impressive in an age before electricity. Vauxhall was also famous for having dark corners that made excellent places for romantic escapades, as well as for people to get robbed, and the low price of admission meant that pretty much anyone could get in. I had a lot of trouble researching the dancing at Vauxhall, because there are very few primary sources that describe what the dancing was actually like at that time period. Although dancing certainly took place at Vauxhall, it was considered mundane compared to the other entertainments that I mentioned before. So when people did give a detailed description of Vauxhall, they would describe those other things in much more detail than they would the dancing. The most that I could find was a few passing reference to dancing in literature and a couple of illustrations of people dancing at Vauxhall to indicate that it was indeed a feature at all. From the scant references we do have, the dancing seems to have been mostly confined to the working classes, as corroborated by Thackeray's description of country dances formed by bouncing cockneys and cockneyesses in his novel Vanity Fair. This is not technically a primary source because it was written a few decades after the Regency, but Thackeray was born in 1811, which means he would have been old enough to remember the Regency from his childhood, and that makes his account somewhat more reliable, although memories can become skewed with the passage of time. For an actual primary source, however, Lord Byron wrote a satire of Vauxhall during the Regency in which he describes the gardens as a place where people dance and sup and dance again. So clearly there was dancing going on, but it still doesn't tell us anything about what the dancing was like. I also saw an anecdote in a newspaper from 1824, which is 4 years after the Regency technically ended, that mentions a respectable shopkeeper's daughter that had been seen dancing at Vauxhall as a proof of its respectability, which seems to corroborate Thackeray's view that this wasn't exactly a venue for fashionable society. However, these inferences are all based on a very limited pool of data, so it's difficult to say much with any certainty. I'm purposely not drawing on sources from the 18th century or the Victorian era about dancing at Vauxhall because these things changed over time and the fashionability of the gardens itself waxed and waned several times. Furthermore, although the aristocracy didn't frequent Vauxhall as a dance venue during the Regency, they were not above dancing there on special occasions. For example, a grand ball was held there in 1813 in honor of Wellington's victory at the Battle of Vittoria, and the ball was notable, among other things, for being the scene of several robberies. But in the Regency era, these sort of events seem to have been the exception rather than the rule. However, that doesn't mean that fashionable society never danced there, and indeed, royalty had been known to patronize the gardens throughout their history, going all the way back to 1732 when Frederick, Prince of Wales, attended a masquerade ball at Vauxhall, and continuing all the way to the Prince Regent of the Regency era. On a slight tangent, another attendee of that masquerade ball in 1732 was an LGBTQ person known as Princess Seraphima. It's difficult to put labels on queer identity in the past because most of our modern terms didn't exist back then, but it's clear that Princess Seraphima was assigned male at birth and still occasionally dressed in male attire, but used she/her pronouns and was known as Princess Seraphima. If you want to learn more about this interesting piece of LGBTQ history, I've linked an article in the description. Returning to the subject at hand, however, in the Regency era, the dancing at Vauxhall seems to have been confined to the working classes, except for special galas and masquerades, at which time you might have seen people like the Bridgertons dancing there. Number 4, private balls. And of course, besides the court balls and the public dance venues, people also held private balls at their own houses, much like what we see in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice with the Netherfield Ball. Only the balls held by the aristocracies in many cases would have been much more opulent depending on who was hosting. For some of the wealthiest families, balls could cost hundreds and even thousands of pounds. The expenses would come from things like hiring a fashionable band to play the music, catering a sumptuous midnight supper, using hundreds of wax candles to light all the great rooms, huge displays of flowers, entertainment for between the dances such as professional singers and dance performers, and of course, one of my favorite details of the Regency ballroom, chalk art on the floors. It was a big trend in the Regency to make grand designs on the ballroom floor with either chalk or watercolors, and designs could serve the decorative function as well as a practical purpose of marking out the dance sets. London's elite often hired professional artists to decorate the floors at exorbitant prices, even though the images would quickly be effaced by dancing feet. I was so happy to see artists painting designs on the ballroom floor at Lady Danbury's ball in the first episode of Bridgerton. That's an excellent detail. So, that's my overview of where the Bridgertons would have danced in Regency London. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a like, subscribe, and leave a comment, or consider becoming a patron on Patreon to help support this channel and receive a few perks, including ad-free versions of all the videos and early access to new content at certain levels and above. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time to find out what some of the typical rules for the ballroom were.